Hello, this is Scott Brady with Progressive Property Management, and today we're going to talk about a not so fun subject, evictions. Here's the good news. Right now, we have a good economy, and our eviction rate here at our company is running very low, less than 1%. But we do get calls often from owners who hire us specifically to get rid of a tenant. And there's two reasons to evict a tenant. It's important you know them. The first one is because they're not paying as agreed. Well, that's pretty easy to evict somebody. That's called a notice to quit or pay. And it simply says, you did not pay me what you owe me per my contract, therefore I want you out of my property. And we find when you go to court on that, if they haven't paid, the judge is going to make them vacate the property. Because when you evict somebody, really what you're doing is, even though you're technically evicting the tenant, you're taking possession of your property back from the tenant. You want possession back because they did not perform as agreed. So if they don't pay, so we'll go through paying. Let's go through the process. Typically, rents are due on the 1st. Typically, they're late on the 5th. So they have a 5-day period to give you the rent. And those are calendar days, of course. So if they haven't paid by the 5th, by law, on the 6th, you can post a 3-day notice to quit or pay. And then the clock starts ticking. Okay, you can't evict them on the 6th. You've got to give them more time to come up with the rent. So that 3-day period are 3 court days, not calendar days. So if the rent was due, it's Thursday, July 5th, and you post on July 6th, Friday, clock doesn't start ticking until not Saturday, not Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. They have to pay the rent. Of course, you can charge them a late fee. California law says you can charge up to 6% of the rent as a late fee. Most owners charge somewhere in that range, or 5% is very common. And if they don't pay the late fee, of course, you can take out a security deposit down the road, or of course, now they're short on rent. But they have those 3 days to come up with the rent. And then if they don't come up, so after 3 court days, they don't pay, well, then you can now go to the court and say, I want my property back. They did not pay me my rent. We hire an attorney here, and we recommend strongly you hire an attorney as well, who are specialists in the eviction law. There's 2 or 3 in the LA, Orange County area that do hundreds of evictions, are very familiar with the court system. And it's going to cost you to file initial to start the eviction process. It's going to cost about $750. That pays for an off-duty sheriff to post, to serve the tenant, try to serve them 3 times, notice that they're going to be evicted, pays for your filing fees, and it pays for some of your legal fees. The tenant has a right to contest your eviction. You might say, well, how can they contest the eviction? They didn't pay. The court doesn't know that. The court doesn't know they didn't pay. So everybody gets their opportunity to get into court and fight for their rights. So if they contest it, all they can do is check a box or even go online and say, I'm contesting this eviction. Well, really what they do is they buy themselves more time. If eviction starts, they're going to get served within a week to 2 weeks. And if they contest it, it's going to take at least 2 or 3 more weeks to get a court date. So you go to that court date. They've contested it. They don't contest it. You take possession of the property. You can actually hire a sheriff, on-duty sheriff, to evict them. Post a notice that they need to vacate, and then they have to leave the property. But 95% of the time, our tenants contest it to buy themselves more time. If they contest it, you go to court. On that court date, there's a little bit of forced mediation. The judge says, go outside. Please come to a meeting of the minds. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And if you don't, then you come back in and the judge hears the story, and usually my experience has been typically the tenant gets out there and says, I just don't have the money, judge. And so the judge says, great, when can you be out of the property? So let's say it's July 15th. They say, judge, I can be out by July 30th. Judge says, great, you're going to be out July 30th. And that's your opportunity to take possession of the property. If they're not out, then of course they can be forcibly removed from the property. Oftentimes there'll be money involved. They owe you $3,000 or $4,000. The judge can say, can you come up with a portion of it? You can agree to there at that time for a certain amount of money. But the bottom line, you're in court not to get money, you're there to get possession. If you want to file a claim against that tenant, let's say they owe thousands of dollars. More importantly, they move on, there's damage to the property, you have loss of rent, plus they've done $5,000 of damage to your property. Well, that's a separate court case. Now you have to file a court case for damages against your tenant, and you have to try to collect that. If you win, you've got to try to collect, and that's not always so easy. The second way you're going to evict is because they're not abiding by the terms of the contract. They have pets you weren't aware of. They have people in there that weren't on the lease. They're just not abiding by the terms of the contract. that's much harder to enforce. So you can post a 3-day notice to cure, so to cure the contract. Let's say you say there's 3 extra people in there. By the time you go to court, those 3 people could be gone. Or let's say they have a pet on the premises, and you want to cure that. You bring it all the way to court. They say, Judge, we were just taking care of that dog for a couple of weeks. The dog is now gone. So notice to cure is much harder to do. And now with all these laws coming down the pike, we just passed the Tenant Protection Law of 2019, where if a tenant is paying as agreed, it's awfully hard to get rid of them. So I guess it's really important, rather than going to eviction, pick your tenants wisely. Pick good tenants who will behave and pay as agreed, and it saves a lot of grief when it comes to it on the eviction side. So I hope that helps. Once again, my name is Scott Brady. Thank you.